So at this point, we have now the most complete amount of information that we have had all offseason long at this point. Now that we have the conclusion of the NFL preseason, now we need to discuss these updated rankings heading into 2023, and we're getting into the top 30 wide receivers for fantasy football. So number 1 and 2, they don't change at all. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase belong at that number 1 and 2 spot right here. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 1 last year, absolutely has a wide receiver 5 floor in fantasy football. Jamar Chase, same type of deal. He's got a very similar floor on his side, and he's also got the better quarterback. And Jamar Chase is now getting a healthy Joe Burrow, as was everybody knew. But at this point, it is now confirmed that Joe Burrow is going to be playing in week 1. So Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are going to be fantastic. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase absolutely have to make Jamar Chase here at number 2. At number 3, I have Tyreek Hill still edging out Cooper Kupp. And really, the reasoning is honestly really easy to me. Tyreek Hill is not dealing with an injury right now like Cooper Kupp is. Tyreek Hill also has the better quarterback. Tyreek Hill with Tua Tagovailoa, younger, better player. This is just a very simple one for me personally, because Matt Stafford, I mean, we're literally looking at a situation here where Matt Stafford could miss a lot of time. Matt Stafford is definitely not in the prime of his career. He is quickly going downhill, and his injury history is concerning at this point. Now, granted, I have been on record saying that Tua is absolutely the type of guy that with one more concussion could be out of the league entirely. No doubt about that at all. But if they're both healthy, I am taking Tyreek Hill with Tua over Cooper Kupp with Stafford. But make no mistake, Cooper Kupp is of course still a great pick in fantasy football, especially now that he's going mid to late first round in a lot of different platforms rather than going in the top 4, top 5 picks. Cooper Kupp is still a fantastic pick in fantasy football, but he is 30 now. And there is other factors, obviously, like we've discussed with injuries and with his quarterback now being 30 years old. There is some reason for concern there for people. Now, at number 5, I've got Stephon Diggs here. And Stephon Diggs is honestly really easy to put here at number 5 because he doesn't have quite the ceiling that the top 4 guys have. Those guys really do have potential to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. But Stephon Diggs basically has the floor of all of those guys. Stephon Diggs has a top 7 to 8 floor with a top 3 ceiling. Stephon Diggs, as you can see on the screen, super consistent wide receiver in fantasy football. Simply just gets targeted more than most guys do, has a great quarterback that he's working with, and he's clearly the number 1 wide receiver in Buffalo. So no question at all to me, number 5 here belongs to Stephon Diggs. And at number 6, I have gotten flack for this, but I stick with this one. Garrett Wilson is number 6 right here for me personally. The thing about Garrett Wilson, man, not only was he a tremendous prospect coming out of college, who everybody knew when he came out of college in 2022 was going to be a stud in this league wherever he went. Going to the New York Jets, though, dealing with what he had at quarterback. Joe Flacco, Mike White, Zach Wilson, and he was still excellent last year. Now he's got Aaron Rodgers, who looks like the real deal connection here. As you may have saw over the weekend, their preseason connection touchdown was pretty awesome to watch. We can expect plenty of that this season from Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson here. I absolutely love Garrett Wilson this year. I just think he is such a clear candidate to become a top 5 to 6 wide receiver in fantasy football this year. And at number 7, I know it's hard to edge A.J. Brown out, but he did just that. And that's no slight at all to A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown should absolutely be on a top 30 offense this year in football. And that is, of course, going to lead him to be a tremendous fantasy option again, because he's clearly the best weapon on the offense that they have. I mean, at this point, they don't have a really solid running back right here, and they've got Jalen Hurts, obviously, with the best weapon. It is A.J. Brown and then Devonta Smith. And of course, nobody denies that and nobody questions that. But A.J. Brown is going to be fantastic again. Don't take this as a slight for me to have him behind Garrett Wilson at number 7. He's going to be tremendous as well. Then we move on to number 8 here, and it's another guy that a lot of people are just lower on this year. It's Davante Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders, man. Do not forget this about Davante Adams. When you look at how consistent he is on the screen, this guy is consistently a top 5 to 3, sometimes number 1 fantasy football wide receiver. Davante Adams is tremendous here. And I get it, man. He's got the quarterback downgrade with Jimmy Garoppolo. And most people aren't wild on Derek Carr. I mean, let's face reality for a second with Derek Carr. Most people are not wild about Derek Carr. So I don't blame people for being really uneasy about this quarterback switch here. And I understand that he is dealing with injury as well. There's no guarantees here that Davante Adams is going to be the player he always has been. But let's look at reality here. Last year did not show signs of slowing down. He was so tremendous last year on a fantasy points per game perspective and just from a play perspective. Nothing went downhill. So I am going to continue to hitch my wagon onto Davante Adams, and especially where he's being drafted at this year. And a lot of times in the second round in a lot of different platforms, he's one of my most targeted and most drafted players of 2023 fantasy football. And moving on to number 9, we've got CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys here. CeeDee Lamb is so clearly the wide receiver 1 in Dallas, right? There's no question about that. Every single year he has improved in fantasy football for the Dallas Cowboys, man. He could absolutely finish as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver, so definitely take note of that. Having him here at 9, I just think that guys like Davante Adams and AJ Brown have a higher ceiling, but CeeDee Lamb absolutely could be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy football this year. Now at number 10, I've got Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions here. Amon-Ra St. Brown is such an easy pick to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. I mean, look at the guy on the screen. He's reliable. The guy consistently gets about 10 targets a game, and he's just super reliable with the work that he gets. And the reality here with Detroit and Amon-Ra St. Brown is this team needs him now more than ever. And the reason for it is because every day, it's like Jameson Williams is just getting worse and worse reports. Right? Like, obviously, he's going to miss the first 6 games with a suspension. But it goes deeper than that. I mean, the guy has been apparently just really underwhelming in a lot of practices this offseason. Now he's got the offseason injury. Now he missed a bunch of time in the preseason. It's like, there's so many issues here with Jameson Williams that Amon-Ra St. Brown is just going to be huge in this offense once again. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, man, feel very, very good about having him on your fantasy football team in 2023. Now moving on to number 11, I've got Mr. Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints right here. So Chris Olave, the thing about him, I really do believe that he has a top 5 ceiling this year in fantasy football. When you look at what he did last year on the screen, it's so impressive what he did knowing that he did it with a combination of Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston. So he had a very similar situation to Garrett Wilson last year. The difference here is that he had 2 quarterbacks rather than 3, but also the big piece of this is that Derek Carr is coming in. And aside from if you think that Derek Carr is a great quarterback, I think we can all acknowledge that he is better than Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston. And the other reality here is that he is going to come in and provide stability above all else for a guy like Chris Olave. So I love Chris Olave, man. He is going to be the top wide receiver, of course, on this team. Derek Carr has consistently put out top 12 fantasy wide receivers throughout his career. I love Chris Olave, man. Got easy top 5 upside in fantasy this year. And at number 12, I've got Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins, man. So Jalen Waddle last year obviously was tremendous, right? And not only just tremendous from a fantasy points per game perspective and overall, but also where you were drafting him at, like the 3rd or 4th round, was a tremendous value for the guy you were getting for him. So Jalen Waddle, absolutely. Totally on an explosive offense, and really, again, easily could finish as a top 7 or 8 wide receiver in fantasy football. Now, moving on to number 13, I've got T. Higgins here of the Cincinnati Bengals. And T. Higgins is the type of guy I think a lot of people get really annoyed with. In fantasy football, you've never seen him finish this high. He's not this type, like he's never had a top 13 to 14 fantasy finish. But when you look at T. Higgins last year, and what you need to do is we need to take out the games where he was barely playing. In the games where he had like 1 or 2 snaps and then he was on the sidelines the rest of the time, let's take out those games and then take out the Damar Hamlin game against the Buffalo Bills. And he's averaging over 15 fantasy points per game. So T. Higgins last year was his best year. It just, when you add it all up, all the games he was active, it doesn't look quite as good. But we have to be able to take out a couple of games intelligently to see what he really did here, man. The guy just needs a little bit more consistency in his life, and I do think that this year of all years is going to be the year he does it, because he knows he's fighting for a contract, and he knows he won't be back in Cincinnati, and so he is fighting for a massive contract somewhere else in the NFL. Now, moving on to number 14, I've got Devonta Smith of the Philadelphia Eagles here. Definitely the wide receiver 2 in Philadelphia. Everybody knows that, right? But he's one of the best wide receiver 2s in the entire NFL. That's the reality here with a guy like Devonta Smith. Was such a stud in 2022. And he was a great prospect coming out of college, but he really came out and was dominant in 2022. And here's the thing about wide receiver 2s in fantasy football. We always want a top tier wide receiver 2 in an NFL team rather than a bad wide receiver 1 for fantasy football purposes. That's what you're getting here with Devonta Smith, and that's exactly what you want to get here. Now we're moving on to number 15, and I've got Mr. Amari Cooper of the Cleveland Browns, man. I love Amari Cooper this year. Absolutely love Amari Cooper. And really, when you look at what he did last year, it was fantastic. He was a stud in 2022 with bad play at quarterback. He had a Jacoby Brissett combination along with a Deshaun Watson that hadn't played in over a full year of football. Now Deshaun Watson is back. He got the full offseason to train with Amari Cooper. He looks better in preseason. I think this is going to be a very good year for Amari Cooper, man. This year, he's just set up for such better success in fantasy football. Now, moving on to number 16, I've got DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks, man. Now, here's the reality with DK Metcalf. He did rise higher in my rankings recently due to the Jackson Smith-Njigba injury, in which he suffered a wrist injury and may not be ready to go at the beginning of the season. In fact, I would say probably do not expect Jackson Smith-Njigba to be ready to go. So what I believe will happen as a result of this is DK is going to start out very, very high. DK is going to come out swinging right away. And once Jackson Smith-Njigba comes back, it's going to make a difference here. Jackson Smith-Njigba will start to eat into DK Metcalf's production. But should you get DK Metcalf, make sure to ride him early. As long as Jackson Smith-Njigba is not there, DK Metcalf is going to have plenty of good games at the beginning. And at number 17 here, I've got Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. Don't kid yourself on this one, guys. Keenan Allen is still the best wide receiver in Los Angeles. It's just a reality. Justin Herbert loves to target Keenan Allen. That is his safety blanket. As you can see, over his time with Justin Herbert, he's basically averaging 10 targets per game. He's tremendous in this type of offense for a guy like Justin Herbert, man. The reality here is that, yes, with the injuries, I can understand people are very hesitant on Keenan Allen these days. But from a play perspective, when you watched him last year, he was not a worse player. So when you look at Keenan Allen this year, if you take out the injuries and you just look at him for a player that he is, he's going to be very good in fantasy football once again. Now, moving on to number 18, I've got Deebo Samuel of the San Francisco 49ers. When you look at Deebo Samuel last year, obviously he had a down year. I was telling people last year, don't draft Deebo Samuel. And I still feel a very, very similar way this year to what I did last year with Deebo Samuel. I don't think he's going to reach his 2021 form again. I think he outperformed who he really is in that particular season. But the reality here with Deebo Samuel is last year we do have to accept that his quarterback situation was very, very unstable. 3 different quarterbacks last year. Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy. Now he's got more stability at the quarterback position. This team is going with Brock Purdy. There's no question about it. So I do think that with more quarterback stability, Deebo Samuel is going to have a bounce back year. At number 19, I've got DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears, man. DJ Moore, here's the thing, man. I've been kind of fighting DJ Moore all offseason long. Coming over to an offense that really is awful. When you look at it from a perspective of last year, terrible when it comes to offense, man. Definitely do not love the potential of this offense. But here's the reality with DJ Moore. He's the clear number 1 wide receiver in this offense. He's looked very good and very involved in this offense during the preseason. There's no question that he is going to be the number 1 wide receiver on this offense. I am starting to buy in a little bit more on DJ Moore. I've already been there with Justin Fields, but I do think that of course someone's going to benefit from that, and the guy who will benefit most is going to be DJ Moore. Now, at number 20 and 21, I have got Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk right back to back here. I get it, man. A lot of people are just so wild on Calvin Ridley. They're going to think he's way too low on my list. I have been saying it all offseason, and I will say it again. I don't love Calvin Ridley this year because not only is he being drafted at the beginning of like round 3 and at the end of round 2 sometimes, Calvin Ridley has not played a game in the NFL since 2021 in October. Yeah, now of course he's got the preseason experience again right now, but he has not played a full regular season game since October of 2021. And our recent history that we have seen over the past several years of players who are coming back off of missing a full season or more in the NFL that was not particularly injury related, by the way, guys like Michael Thomas, Le'Veon Bell, and Deshaun Watson, they are not good in their first year back. Not saying that he can't be good. Maybe he does buck that trend. But I would personally rather go with Christian Kirk in my fantasy football drafts, and I've been telling you guys to do that as well because the price on Christian Kirk is so much better. You're basically getting him as a mid to back end wide receiver 3 in fantasy football drafts. It is simply way too much to pass on that type of value for an offense that is going to be extremely explosive this year. Christian Kirk is not all of a sudden going away, especially with the contract that they have him under. I like Christian Kirk a little bit better, in my opinion, this year in fantasy football. Now, moving on to number 22, I've got Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers, man. The biggest concern here with Christian Watson, of course, is related to his quarterback. That's the biggest concern here. We don't know what Jordan Love is going to be. If I had to guess, Jordan Love is going to be a massive game manager this year. But the reality here is that Christian Watson is honestly just a really, really good player. When you look at what he did last year, I mean, this guy was a really good player in fantasy football, specifically at the end. Probably helped a lot of people win fantasy championships last year. I know he helped me get to the championship in one of my fantasy leagues last year. Christian Watson is a very good player, and honestly, he's been one of my favorite draft picks over the last several weeks in fantasy football drafts right now because of his price. Now, moving on to number 23, I've got Drake London, and he's very much in a very similar situation as a guy like Christian Watson is. They're both super, super talented players. They just don't have the quarterback, man. Drake London is dealing with Desmond Ridder. Nobody wants to deal with Desmond Ridder at quarterback, man. It's a very similar issue. Drake London's an even better player, though, than Christian Watson is. So these two types of guys I've been drafting a ton of this offseason because they're second-year players who are just complete studs, and they're not exactly in the best situation. So the price on them is way more affordable than it would be if they had an Aaron Rodgers at quarterback, if they had a Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. They have way worse situations, making their price a lot more affordable. I advise people to draft either Christian Watson or Drake London. Now, moving on to 24 and 25, I've got DeAndre Hopkins and George Pickens in this tier. When you look at a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, he's on an offense that is not going to be throwing the ball that much. This is going to be a run-first offense here. With that being said, he is definitely going to be the clear number 1 target in this offense. And I think he's going to help Treylon Burks a lot, opening things up for him. He's got a veteran quarterback who knows how to get the ball distributed. So I do think that DeAndre Hopkins is absolutely going to be a safe player in fantasy football. Don't think he's going to bust, but of course, the ceiling is not as high as a guy like George Pickens at number 25. The ceiling of George Pickens is higher than the wide receiver 25. Kenny Pickett looks very good in preseason. He looks like he's taking a massive leap, and George Pickens is taking a massive leap as well. And they were already very good last year together. 97.6 quarterback rating for Kenny Pickett when he was targeting George Pickens last year. This duo is going to be very good again this year. He's going to be the wide receiver 1 in Pittsburgh this year, in my opinion, and it's going to be a great year for George Pickens. Now, dropping down to number 26 and number 27, I've got Mike Williams and Jerry Jeudy on this list right here. Mike Williams, of course, is in a great offense. He's in one of the best offenses in football, specifically for passing the ball and for getting the ball to wide receivers. This is a great offense to be a part of, and Mike Williams is going to give you the big boom games as he always does, but he's also going to give you a couple of stinkers for sure. That's the reality of Mike Williams that we live with. And with Jerry Jeudy, I had him higher but I had to drop him because of the injury that we're dealing with here. He probably will not be on the field to start the season. Therefore, I had to drop a guy like Jerry Jeudy down. But when he does come back, he's going to be the clear wide receiver 1 in this offense on a much more improved offense with Sean Payton. And Russell Wilson is looking better from last year. So I do think that when Jerry Jeudy comes back, the upside is going to be there. It's just going to be a matter of time. And in my last tier, I've got Mike Evans, Brandon Ayuk, and Jackson Smith-Njigba right here. Mike Evans is the one guy in Tampa Bay that I'm willing to draft. And the reality is, of course, that Mike Evans is so consistent in fantasy football. I can get on board with drafting Mike Evans as late as he is going in fantasy drafts. Brandon Ayuk is going to be a part of that great San Francisco offense. Brock Purdy now as the confirmed starter. I like Brandon Ayuk this year. Jackson Smith-Njigba would have been higher on this list. Actually, originally had him around top 20. But of course, the wrist injury that he is going to be dealing with at the start of the season is a bummer. He probably will not start the season, and therefore it will take him more time to get going, considering that he is a rookie. But I still love Jackson Smith-Njigba in fantasy drafts right now. So let me know what you think of the rankings below, and let's say that you're drafting tonight, and you have the 1 through 3 spot. Either pick 1, 2, or 3. And if you want to know that particular draft strategy for you to dominate that range and get the best team possible, click on this video right here.